August 6, 1944. High over Hamburg, Germany. Major George Preddy is flying escort for American bombers, nursing a hangover from a war bond party the night before, when roughly 60 German Bf-109 fighters, arranged in two stacked formations of 30, moved to intercept the bomber stream, without noticing the P-51 Mustangs already positioned above and behind them. Preddy leads his wingman into the lower formation from directly astern. When the fight is over, 6 German fighters are down, all credited to one American pilot in a matter of minutes. Preddy will receive the Distinguished Service Cross for that single mission and be nominated by his own squadron commander for the Medal of Honor. Pause on that. The most productive few minutes of any American fighter pilot's war, at least among those flying the P-51 Mustang, were flown by a man who had spent the previous evening at a party rather than resting for combat, against a formation of enemy fighters that outnumbered his own flight roughly 30-1 before the shooting even started. This is not simply a story about a pilot with extraordinary reflexes. It is the story of how a specific airplane, a specific tactical position, and a fighter force already thinning out in pilot experience by the summer of 1944 combined to produce one of the most lopsided single engagements of the air war over Europe, and of the man who happened to be in the right cockpit when it did. Part 1. George Preddy's road to that August morning did not begin in Europe at all. He had first seen combat flying P-40 Warhawks over Darwin, Australia, defending against Japanese air raids with the 49th Pursuit Group, an assignment that ended after a mid-air collision with another P-40, hospitalized him and killed the other pilot. After recovering, he was assigned to the 352nd Fighter Group, a unit that would fly first the P-47 Thunderbolt, and then, from April 1944 onward, the North American P-51 Mustang, an aircraft whose combination of a British-designed Merlin engine, a low-drag laminar flow wing, and enough internal and drop-tank fuel capacity to escort bombers deep into Germany and back made it, by the time Preddy strapped into one, arguably the single most effective long-range fighter either side had produced in the war. That range mattered enormously to the specific job the Mustang was being asked to do by mid-1944. Earlier American fighters, the P-47 among them, had the speed and firepower to fight the Luftwaffe on equal terms, but lacked the fuel capacity to escort heavy bombers all the way to targets deep inside Germany and back, forcing bomber crews to fly the final, most dangerous legs of many missions without fighter cover at all. The Mustang, especially once fitted with additional external drop tanks, could accompany the bomber stream to Berlin and back on a single mission, a capability that fundamentally changed the character of the daylight bombing campaign and put fighters like Preddy's directly in position to intercept exactly the kind of large German formations that had, earlier in the war, been free to attack unescorted bomber boxes with comparative impunity. The Mustang's laminar flow wing, a design that kept airflow smooth and attached over more of the wing's surface than older airfoil shapes, gave it lower drag at high speed without sacrificing the structural strength needed for combat maneuvering, while the license-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine that replaced the original Allison power plant in later models restored the high-altitude performance the earlier version had lacked, making the P-51D that pilots like Preddy flew by mid-1944 a genuinely different and considerably more dangerous aircraft than the Mustang variants that had first entered service 2 years earlier. Part 2. The 352nd Fighter Group flew out of RAF Bodney in Norfolk under a paint scheme, bright blue spinners and nose panels that earned the unit its nickname among German pilots and its own aircrew alike, the Bluenosers. Preddy had already built a substantial combat record before the August mission, becoming an ace in May 1944 and adding steadily to his tally through the following months, while flying an aircraft he and his crew chief nicknamed Cripes-a-Mighty, the name stenciled beneath the cockpit through several successive airframes as each one was upgraded or lost. The name, along with a small tally of victory markings painted beneath the canopy rail, became one of the more recognizable individual aircraft markings flown by any American ace in the European theater, photographed repeatedly by unit photographers, and later reproduced in post-war paintings and model kits commemorating the 352nd's most successful pilot. The aircraft itself changed hands through several successive airframes over Preddy's tour, a common practice as damaged or worn Mustangs were replaced with newer models. meaning the Krieps-A-Mighty that appears in photographs from the August mission was not the same physical airplane he had flown earlier that spring, even though the name and the pilot remained constant. His squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer, himself a 26 victory ace who would later reach 4-star rank, would say of him that he was the greatest fighter pilot who ever squinted through a gunsight, a judgment that reflected not just Preddy's growing score, but his reputation among other pilots for aggressive, disciplined flying rather than reckless individual heroics. Fellow pilots in the squadron described him as approachable and unassuming on the ground, notably lacking the swagger some other high-scoring aces cultivated, a contrast that made his aggressiveness in the cockpit stand out even more sharply to the men who flew alongside him. Part 3. The mission on August 6th began as a routine bomber escort to targets around Hamburg, one of dozens the 352nd had flown that summer. As the bomber formation approached its target, German controllers vectored a large force of Bf-109s, roughly 30 fighters flying low with another 30 stacked above them as top cover, to intercept before the escorts could react. According to the citation later attached to Preddy's Distinguished Service Cross, the German pilots did not notice the Mustangs positioned above and behind them, and Preddy, with only his wingman alongside him, dove on the lower formation from directly astern, exploiting both surprise and the tactical advantage of attacking from an unexpected angle against pilots who had not yet spotted the threat. He shot down 2 Bf-109s in his first pass. As the surviving Germans began to scatter, realizing only then that they were under attack, Preddy shot down 2 more. Continuing to chase the fleeing formation down through the altitude band, he claimed a 5th kill, and as the remaining aircraft descended toward roughly 5,000 feet, a 6th, making him one of only 38 American pilots in the entire war credited with becoming an ace in a day. A full 5 aerial victories or more scored in a single mission. The Distinguished Service Cross citation attached to the mission spells out the imbalance in stark terms. Preddy and his wingman, effectively a flight of 2, attacked a formation the citation describes as 30 enemy fighters with an additional 30 providing top cover. 60 German aircraft in total against 2 American ones at the moment the engagement began. The citation credits Preddy specifically with breaking up what could otherwise have been a devastating attack on the bomber formation below, noting that his aggressive pursuit of the lower German flight, in spite of the numerical odds and the risk of being bounced from above by the top cover formation, forced the entire German attack to disintegrate before it ever reached the bombers it had been sent to destroy. Part 4. It is worth being precise and honest about exactly how fast those 6 kills came, because sources describing the mission do not fully agree. Some contemporary and post-war accounts describe the entire engagement, from Preddy's first pass to his 6th kill, unfolding in a little over 6 minutes. Others, including some of the more widely circulated retellings used for the video title itself, compress the same sequence to closer to 4. What both versions agree on, and what the official Distinguished Service Cross citation itself does not dispute, is the outcome. 6 confirmed kills credited to a single pilot in one continuous engagement, an achievement that remains, by any reasonable accounting, one of the fastest, most productive single missions flown by any American ace of the war, whether the precise window was 4 minutes or somewhat longer. This kind of small factual variance between sources, 4 minutes in some retellings, a little over 6 in others, is common in accounts of fast-moving aerial combat, where the pilots themselves were focused on flying and shooting rather than checking a stopwatch, and where post-war interviews and unit histories were sometimes compiled years or decades after the fact from memory and second-hand recollection. It does not change the confirmed outcome recorded in Preddy's official victory credits and the Distinguished Service Cross citation itself, both of which rest on gun camera film, wingman testimony, and squadron debriefing records compiled within days of the mission, rather than on the specific minute count that later became a popular shorthand for how remarkable the engagement was. Part 5. Recognition followed quickly. On August 12th, less than a week after the mission, Preddy received the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest American award for valor, with a citation praising his extraordinary heroism and disregard for personal safety. His squadron commander, John Meyer, went further and nominated him for the Medal of Honor itself, a recommendation that ultimately did not result in the nation's highest award for valor being granted, but reflected how remarkable the mission looked, even to officers who had themselves flown some of the war's toughest engagements. Preddy was sent home to the United States for a 30-day leave shortly afterward, returning to a country that had, by mid-1944, developed a genuine appetite for stories of individual American fighter pilots succeeding against long odds over occupied Europe. The war bond circuit Preddy toured during that leave was not incidental detail either. By 1944, the government relied heavily on decorated combat veterans to headline bond rallies across the country, and a pilot who had just downed 6 enemy aircraft in a single mission made for an especially compelling draw. One more reminder that the same appetite for a clean, dramatic story that shapes how this mission gets remembered today was already shaping how it was being marketed to the American public within weeks of it happening. Part 6. Preddy's combat record did not end with the August mission. Returning to England in late October 1944, he was given command of the 328th Fighter Squadron, a unit within his own 352nd Fighter Group that had, up to that point, been the group's lowest-scoring squadron and was struggling with morale. Preddy is remembered as offering his new command little more than a short, blunt statement of purpose: to shoot down the enemy, before leading by example. On November 2nd, flying a brand new P-51D fitted with the newly issued K-14 gyroscopic gunsight, a computing sight that automatically calculated lead angle based on target range and closure rate, rather than requiring a pilot to estimate deflection by eye, Preddy shot down a Bf-109 over Merseburg, while the rest of his squadron combined to down 24 additional enemy aircraft in the same mission, setting an 8th Air Force record for victories credited to a single squadron in one engagement, a record that stood as a testament to how thoroughly he had turned around a unit that had been struggling only weeks earlier. The K-14 gunsight itself deserves a mention, since it represented a genuine technological leap over the fixed, reflector-style gunsights most fighter pilots on both sides had used for the first several years of the war. By having the pilot set the target's approximate wingspan on a dial and track it with a twist-grip throttle control, the sight's internal gyroscope automatically computed the lead angle needed to hit a maneuvering target, correcting for range and angular velocity in ways that had previously depended entirely on a pilot's trained eye and experience. Not every pilot adapted to the new equipment quickly, and some veteran aces reportedly preferred their old, simpler sights out of habit. But for a unit like the 328th Fighter Squadron, working to close a scoring gap with its sister squadrons, the improved accuracy the K-14 offered newer, less experienced pilots was a genuine asset. Part 7. It would be a mistake to read the August 6th mission purely as proof of one pilot's individual brilliance, separate from the broader condition of the air war by the summer of 1944. By that point in the conflict, the Luftwaffe's fighter force, however numerically still formidable on paper, had lost a substantial share of its most experienced pilots to nearly 3 years of continuous attrition on multiple fronts. And many of the men flying Bf-109s over Germany that August had received considerably less training than their counterparts earlier in the war, a consequence of a fuel and training crisis that had shortened Luftwaffe flight schools, even as American pilots like Preddy were, if anything, becoming more experienced with every mission they survived. None of that erases what Preddy did in the cockpit that day. The surprise approach from astern, the discipline to keep pressing the attack, pass after pass, rather than breaking off after an initial success, and the raw flying skill required to convert 6 separate firing opportunities into 6 confirmed kills. Plenty of pilots who found themselves with a similar tactical advantage over the course of the war failed to convert it into more than 1 or 2 kills before the element of surprise wore off, and the enemy formation scattered or turned to fight back. Preddy's ability to keep tracking, closing, and firing on 5 additional separate aircraft after his first 2 kills, without losing the position that had made the attack possible in the first place, is the part of the mission that is hardest to attribute to circumstance alone. But the fullest, most honest version of the story credits both the pilot and the increasingly uneven fight he happened to find himself in. rather than treating the mission as evidence that the P-51 Mustang, or any single pilot, could have produced the same result against the Luftwaffe of 1940 or 1941. It is also worth noting that the Bf-109 pilots Preddy engaged that day were not necessarily green replacements with only a handful of flight hours, a caveat that is easy to lose in a story built around the word surprise. German fighter units defending the Reich in the summer of 1944 still included experienced pilots, some of them veterans of the Eastern Front transferred west as the strategic bombing campaign intensified, and the sheer scale of the formation Preddy attacked, 60 aircraft split into 2 layers, reflects a Luftwaffe still capable of massing large numbers of fighters against a single bomber stream, even as its overall training pipeline was eroding. What made the engagement so lopsided was less a simple gap in raw pilot skill, and more the tactical situation itself. An unalerted formation caught from directly astern by fighters it had not detected, at the one moment surprise mattered most. George Preddy did not survive the war. On the morning of Christmas Day 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, he shot down 2 more Bf-109s while leading a patrol near Liège, Belgium, before being vectored to intercept a lone Focke-Wulf FW-190 strafing American ground troops. Chasing the German fighter at treetop height, his Mustang and 2 others suddenly crossed over an American anti-aircraft position, whose crew had not been informed that friendly aircraft were operating in the area at low altitude. The battery opened fire on the FW-190 and, in the chaos and closing speed of the moment, hit Preddy's aircraft instead. He was able to release his canopy, but was killed before he could escape the stricken plane, ending the war's highest-scoring American P-51 pilot's life not in combat against the enemy he had spent 2 years fighting, but by the fire of his own side. He was 25 years old, credited by war's end with over 26 aerial victories, the great majority of them scored in the aircraft whose reputation his own flying had helped build. He is buried at the Lorraine American Cemetery in France, beside his younger brother William, a fellow P-51 pilot who was killed in action less than 4 months later. The circumstances of Preddy's death carry their own difficult irony, one the channel's viewers of these stories will recognize by now as a recurring pattern. The same low-altitude, high-speed pursuit tactics that had made him one of the most effective fighter pilots of the war, the willingness to chase a target down to treetop height rather than break off and climb to safety, put him directly in the path of friendly anti-aircraft fire on the one mission where the danger came from behind rather than ahead. Investigations after the incident found no evidence of negligence rising to the level of formal discipline against the anti-aircraft crew involved, concluding instead that the failure was one of communication, a stand-down order that had not reached every gun position in the sector before 3 Mustangs at treetop height and high speed crossed directly into their field of fire while chasing an enemy aircraft that briefly looked, from the ground, like exactly the threat those guns had been placed there to stop. Subscribe if you want the next chapter, because there are more of these. More pilots who turned a single, extraordinary mission into a permanent place in the historical record. And more honest looks at exactly how much of that success came down to skill, how much came down to the specific machine they were flying, and how much came down to simply being in the right formation at the right altitude on the one morning the enemy below them never looked up in time. Preddy's own name lives on today, far from the airfields he flew from. A stretch of interstate through his hometown of Greensboro, North Carolina carries his name. A veterans post there was named for him within a few years of the war's end, and the Preddy Memorial Foundation, established by his cousin decades later, continues to keep both his story and his brother William's in circulation for a generation of Americans with no direct memory of the war either of them died fighting.